Hi everyone, this is Matt. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk to you about PhD Vivas. Now, every PhD student I know is stressing about their Viva, and I was as well. But is it something that we actually really need to be so anxious about? Can we actually enjoy our PhD Viva? Is it actually possible? So let's dive deeper into this. Let's talk about the purpose of your Viva and potential questions you might get and how to handle them. And I'm sure after watching this video, you will know exactly what to do to get ready for your PhD Viva, and it actually might be a very enjoyable experience. First of all, the general purpose of a PhD Viva is for your examiners to check whether you've done the work yourself, whether you've written your thesis yourself, and whether you understand the experiments you did, how you did them, and have any ideas for what to do next. This is not sort of a test where you need to answer 16 questions out of 20 to pass. This is more of a conversation between you and fellow researchers, scientists, people who are interested in your field and actually spend their lives working in a similar field. So they're just excited about what you did and they want to know more. So consider this a conversation with fellow researchers rather than a test, because this is really what it is. And to give you an example of this, I have a friend who literally during her PhD Viva had her two examiners talking to each other about science, about research for about 10 minutes, and they completely ignored her and they just had a chat. Because remember, these are people who love research, who love this, who love the field you're working in, and they're very passionate about it. So they come to the Viva to learn from you, to exchange ideas, and to think about what to do next in the future. Let's move to questions now. The first question you're gonna get will be an easy one, because your examiners will want to make sure that you're calm, you're relaxed, and they need to get you going, they need to get you talking. And the easiest way to do it is to give you a simple question that they can be certain that you'll be able to answer. So for example, they will ask you for an overview of your PhD thesis, an overview of a particular technique that you repeated so many times during your PhD. So something easy, something broad, and they will want an outline. Once you start talking and they can see that you're relaxed and you feel like you've got it, then they will actually start asking you more in-depth questions. But first of all, they want to make sure that you're not anxious and you're not panicking. So now let's talk about the in-depth questions you might get. So some of them might be based on the expertise of your examiners. So obviously they have their own interests, they do their own research. So read up on the research, see what their interests are, and think what kind of questions they could ask you from their own perspective, from the perspective of their own research. Now, I know a lot of people who got these questions based on expertise of the examiners. However, during my PhD Viva, I didn't get any. I didn't get a single question based on the expertise of my PhD examiners. So it's not given, but it's definitely worth considering that they might ask you something related to their own field. A really good strategy to predict what kind of questions you might get is to ask your fellow PhD students from your lab and from different labs to give you a set of questions they would ask you during your PhD Viva. Now, I asked about 10 of my friends and I have got 150 questions from them. And this was brilliant because this really helped me prepare for my PhD Viva. And some of these questions actually were repeated by my examiners. So it was really good practice and it was definitely worthwhile. Your examiners will definitely ask you about gaps in your research. So think about your PhD thesis as a story, and if there are any gaps in the story, or data is not black and white, it's a bit wishy-washy, we're not exactly sure what is happening here, they will definitely ask about this. So prepare some answers, or at least think about it, what you would say if they asked you about the gaps in your research. They will also definitely ask you about future experiments, what you would do next, if you had money, if you were doing a postdoc, if you had more time, what else would you do? Or how would you change the experiments that you've done? They will definitely ask you overview questions. So please give us an overview of chapter 4 of your thesis, an overview of your discussion, of your summary, an overview of your whole PhD thesis. They will also ask you about methods. So how you've done these experiments, how did you do them, what reagents did you use, what's the difference between one method and the other method, what are the advantages and disadvantages of particular methods that you followed. And then finally, we will ask you introduction questions. And questions regarding your introduction are the most difficult ones. And no one is expecting that you will be able to answer all of them, right? But they want to see that you're able to answer at least some of them. So when it comes to introduction, this is when people actually feel like they're being grilled and they're not doing so well, because any question about your results or discussion should be easy question for you, because you've been working on your project for the last number of years. You know this inside out. So you will be able to have a proper discussion with them about your results and your discussion. But introduction is difficult, and they might ask you anything that you cited in your introduction. Any paper you cited in your introduction is fair game for a question. But that doesn't mean that they expect you to know answers to all of these questions. We just need to see that you have a good understanding of the field. So now you have an idea of what kind of questions you might get. You will get questions about gaps in the research, about future experiments, about introduction, about methods, and some questions based on your examiner's interests. But now, how do we handle these questions? How actually should you answer them to set the tone of the conversation? So let's say they ask you a question, please give us an overview of chapter 4 of your thesis. And at this point, first of all, you give them key points from chapter 4, right? Then you need to give them critical appraisal. You tell them about disadvantages and advantages of chapter 4, of the research you've done. What are the strong points? What are the weak points? Immediately point them all out. That's really important. But they can see that you know what you've done inside out, and you're not afraid to say, this didn't really work, but this worked very well. So, however, when you move from these strong and weak points, you need to suggest what you would do next, because clearly you pointed out weak points in your chapter 4. So now what you need to say is, okay, I'm not so sure about this and that. However, if I had more time or more money, this is what I would do next. So you need to give them future experiments, what you would do next. And then you need to justify this by fitting your research into the wider, bigger picture. How does your research fit with your examiner's research, with other fields that are similar to your field, right? Always give them a bigger picture, and then sum up your answer by giving them a quick summary and conclusions. So whenever they ask you a question, start with key points, then move to critical appraisal of these key points. So what are the strong points, what are the weak points of the research you've done? Then fit all of this into wider research area, and then finish by giving them conclusions, future experiments, and summarize it all together nicely. Now, if you answer in this way, you will protect yourself from additional questions, right? You will not get questions anymore about what else would you do in the future, what are the weak points of your research, right? All of this will be very clear to them, that you understand what you've done. It is really important that you incorporate the bigger picture in your answers, because your examiners could ask you about, oh, how would you connect your research to my field or someone else's field, right? And this might be really difficult to answer. However, if you set that bigger picture yourself, if you compare your research to another field that you actually know, you understand, you set the tone. This is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about stuff that I understand, that I know, and we will not be talking about anything you want to talk about. So you give them the bigger picture, and it's very likely that they will leave it as it is, right? And move to the next chapter. Because it's so important that they can see that you see the strong points and you see the weak points of the research, and you see how it fits overall and what you would do next. So if they see that you have ideas of what you would do next, they will also not ask you these kind of questions, right? So you protect yourself by giving them a very comprehensive answer from additional questions, from follow-up questions they might have, which are out of your control. As you answer their questions, try to think of their own perspective, right? Try to incorporate your examiner's field into your own answers. Now, you don't have to go in depth, just try to mention it, try to link your research with their research, right? And then they will see that you appreciate what they do, you're also interested in their own field. And again, this might protect you from more in-depth questions about their own field. And they will be happy with the fact that you mentioned your research and their research together, somehow combined, and they will move on to the next set of questions. If they ask you a question and you don't know the answer, don't pretend that you know, right? Just tell them you don't know, and then ask them if you can give them your educated guess, your best guess. They will appreciate this. They will know that what you're saying is purely hypothetical. And again, they understand that you will not know everything, and it's okay to not know everything. It's not okay to lie and pretend that you know, but it's okay to not know everything and hypothesize. That's absolutely fine. So the way to answer questions is to give them key points, evaluate these key points, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and then fit them into the wider research field and talk about future experiments. What would you do next? And this is how you will set the conversation, the tone of the conversation. My PhD Viva lasted for about 2.5 hours, and I really enjoyed it. When I went there, I was so stressed. But when the moment they asked me the first question, it was an easy question, just an overview of my PhD thesis. I started talking and then I relaxed. And from then on, it was just pleasure to talk to them about my research. Because, you know, I was so interested in my research. They were so interested in my research. It was a really nice conversation to have. Now, I know people who had their PhD Vivas much longer, that lasted for 4 hours, even 5 hours. And I know one PhD Viva that ended literally because one of the examiners has to leave to pick up their child from school. So it can really last quite a while. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be horrible. What it means is that the examiners might be so passionate about your field. They will just want to talk about it. They will want to ask you questions, talk between themselves about your research, make notes, exchange ideas. In the end of the day, these are people who are just really interested in science. And they want to know more, they're curious, they want to ask questions and find out the answers. So because you don't know how long your PhD Viva might last, I'd say prepare yourself for even 4 or 5 hours. So bring some water and bring some snacks. And not just for yourself, also for your examiners, who will really appreciate it. And remember, this is just a meeting between fellow researchers to talk about science, to talk about research, and enjoy it. So let's have some water, let's have some snacks and continue, because the worst thing is you don't want to be halfway through the conversation and they keep asking you questions and you're getting hungry or you're thirsty and you actually need a break. So let's make sure this doesn't happen. Make sure that you're ready for a long chat and go over and enjoy it. Because really, I know it's daunting and it's stressful and you worked so hard for so long, and now everything depends on this one single conversation. But actually, everything's fine. These guys are going there just to have a chat about research, about science with you. And that's it. That's all it is. So enjoy it.